There is a particular kind of tired that does not want silence. It wants the sound of something already known, a place the mind can lie down inside without having to watch where it steps. For a great many people, that place is Bikini Bottom. You do not need to see the screen to know what is happening. You hear the wet squeak of a certain laugh, the low patient grumble of a neighbor who never wanted company, a small bright voice that greets each morning as though mornings were a gift. The words arrive a half-second before they are spoken, because you have heard them so often that they live somewhere under your own thoughts now, and that recognition is its own soft weight, pulling you down toward rest. What follows is not really about the jokes. Underneath a show that seems built entirely out of cheerful nonsense, there is a surprising amount that does not hold together, small contradictions that the series never bothered to resolve, and never needed to. Tonight is a slow walk through those cracks, one paradox at a time, each one turned over gently in the low light, set back down. Consider only the simplest one to begin. A driver's license appears on screen in the first season, in an episode called Sleepy Time, and it gives a birth date that would make this character barely a teenager. And yet he lives alone, holds a full job, and still cannot manage to pass the test that would let him drive. The series never explains this, never tries, and that untroubled silence, that willingness to let a thing be true and impossible at once, is exactly the texture we will move through until you are asleep. Welcome to Krabby. This is a quiet place, made for the hour when you are done with the day, and only want a familiar voice to carry you the rest of the way down. Find whatever position lets your shoulders drop. Turn the light low, or turn it off. There is nothing here you need to follow closely, and nothing you can miss. Let it wash over you, and let yourself drift. The premise of this whole series rests on a small piece of laminated plastic. In the first season episode called Sleepy Time, SpongeBob is shown holding a driver's license, and if you slow the image down, you can read the birth date printed on it, of July, 1986. Do the arithmetic against the series premiere in 1999, and the sponge who lives in that pineapple is roughly 13 years old. A young teenager. That single detail, glimpsed for a moment in an early episode, is the first crack in a surface that will spend the next quarter of a century quietly refusing to hold together. There is a complication built into the crack itself, which is fitting, because this is a show that seems to generate complications the way it generates episodes. The license does not appear in the ordinary world of the story. It appears inside a dream. Sleepy Time is an episode about SpongeBob drifting through the sleeping minds of the other citizens of the town, and the driver's license surfaces in that dream logic, which is exactly why fans and the outlets that write about the series tend to wave it away. A date seen in a dream, a reason, not a date you can trust, is the kind of evidence that would be thrown out of any serious court, though it gets thrown out here too. The trouble is that the number does not stay politely inside the dream where it might be dismissed and forgotten. It comes back. In the second season episode No Free Rides, the license appears again, and the birth date on it is the same, 1986, once more. Two separate episodes, one dream and one not, agreeing on a figure that would place this character somewhere in early adolescence. Then, having said it twice, the series goes quiet on the matter forever. Later appearances of that license are not even consistent. In some episodes, the birth date simply vanishes, and in at least one, it quietly changes to a different date altogether. The number is stated, repeated, and then abandoned, never confirmed and never corrected, left to hang in the air like a question nobody wants to answer out loud. Sit with what that number would mean if you took it at face value. This is a character who lives alone in his own house. He holds down a full-time job, cooking behind the grill at a restaurant, day after day, with all the routine and responsibility that implies, and at the same time he attends a boating school, taught by Mrs. Puff, trying and failing over and over to earn the license to drive. Think about the shape of that life, the independence of an adult, the labor of an adult, sitting alongside the schooling of a child, all in the same body, all treated by the series as perfectly unremarkable. No single explanation reconciles those pieces. A 13-year-old does not run a household and work a full shift. An adult does not spend his days in a beginner's classroom failing the same test. The age suggested by the license and the life shown on the screen belong to two different people. The story asks you to accept that they are one. This is the first of the patterns this series will follow, and it helps to name it plainly before going further. Call it the age loop. What it describes is a standing condition, a character who is simultaneously young and grown, a student and a worker, a resident and a dependent, and who never resolves into one or the other because the story was never built to make him resolve. He simply exists in both states at once, and the license is the document that accidentally wrote the contradiction down. The second pattern is about beginnings, about where things are said to come from, And here the series contradicts itself in a way that is easier to see once you are looking for it. The very first episode, Help Wanted, is an origin story of the ordinary kind. SpongeBob wants the job at the Krusty Krab. He is hired, and the episode frames that hiring as the true start of his career as a fry cook. It says, in effect, that he has trained his whole life for this moment, which is a lovely and slightly grand thing for a character to say on his first day of work. It gives the career a clean starting point. Everything begins here, with the hiring, at the front of the series. Years later, in the 2007 episode Friend or Foe, that clean starting point is moved. The episode is told as Mr. Krabs' own remembered account, flashback narrated by the man himself. In his telling, SpongeBob appears as an infant, a baby, already cooking a Krabby Patty and cooking it perfectly. Set that beside the first episode and the two do not fit. Help Wanted says the career began when the sponge was hired. Friend or Foe says the sponge was born to it, that the connection to the food runs back to the cradle, long before any job existed. Both cannot be the first note in the story. One of them has to be pushing the origin somewhere the other never intended it to go, and it is the later episode, reaching back into infancy, that does the pushing. That same flashback carries a second origin story folded inside it, and this one belongs not to the sponge but to the rivalry that drives so much of the story. Friend or Foe reveals that Mr. Krabs and Plankton, the two figures who spend the whole series locked in opposition, were once childhood best friends. According to Krabs' account, they fell out during the invention of the Krabby Patty formula, and that falling out becomes the specific, self-contained root of everything that comes after. It is a tidy origin, the kind that explains a lifelong feud with a single childhood wound. But because it is Krabs' own flashback, it is also a story told by one of the two people it is about, which is worth holding in mind as the formula itself begins to come apart. Because the formula does come apart. This is the third pattern, the canon versus canon conflict, where the series tells you the same secret more than once and gives you a different answer each time. In the third season, in Plankton's army, a recipe does turn up on screen, but it turns out to be a decoy that Mr. Krabs planted just in case Plankton ever got his hands on it. It lists salt, chopped onion, something written as a cup of love, and ground plankton. That last ingredient is startling on its own, but set it aside for now, and simply note the list, because it is offered to you as the real thing. Then, Friend or Foe gives a different version. In Krabs' flashback, a fight breaks out during the formula's creation, and Plankton's copied half of the recipe ends up reading only a pinch of chum. A pinch of chum. That is not the list from Plankton's army. The two accounts of what the formula actually contains do not agree, and one of them comes from the very episode that also gave us the touching story of the two friends. The origin of the feud and the contradiction of the recipe arrive in the same breath, from the same narrator. And then there is a third version still, in the episode The Great Patty Caper, where the ingredients appear on screen once more, and read this time as flour, barnacle shavings, salt, and turmeric. 3 episodes, 3 formulas, salt and chopped onion, and a cup of love and ground plankton in one, pinch of chum in another, flour and barnacle shavings and salt and turmeric in the third. No two of them match. The secret recipe, the single most guarded object in the entire world of the series, the thing whole plots are built around protecting, has no fixed content at all. It is whatever the current episode needs it to be. There is one thread that survives the contradiction, and it is a strange and almost tender one. Across these otherwise conflicting reveals, love keeps appearing as an ingredient. It is there in Plankton's army as a cup of love. The same word is named again in an episode called Growth Spout, and it appears once more in the theatrical film Sponge Out of Water. 3 separate installments, 3 different contexts, and love recurring in all of them, while the salt and the onion and the turmeric and the chum come and go. If the formula has a true constant, the only element the series seems unwilling to drop no matter how many times it rewrites the list, it is that one. Make of that what you will. I find it the most human detail in a mess of contradictions, the show insisting on the same soft idea, while it forgets everything measurable around it. The fourth pattern is the broken timeline, the moment where the story's own ending simply fails to happen. The SpongeBob SquarePants movie, released in 2004, closes on a promotion. Mr. Krabs makes SpongeBob the manager of a brand new second restaurant, the Krusty Krab 2. It is a real ending, an arc completed, a fry cook rewarded and elevated after everything he has been through. And then, the television series that carried on after the film came out never adopts it. SpongeBob is a fry cook again in the seasons that follow, back at the original grill, back at the original restaurant, as though the promotion and the second restaurant and the whole triumphant close of the film had never taken place. The reason is not a mistake, but a decision, and it lives in the real history of how the series was made. Stephen Hillenburg, the man who created SpongeBob, conceived that 2004 film as a finale. It was meant to be the end. He stepped down as showrunner after its release, and Paul Tibbitt took over the series. But Nickelodeon did not want an ending. The network ordered more seasons, and those seasons carried on without ever referencing the film's conclusion. Is why the manager of the Krusty Krab 2 reverted to a fry cook. The story reached its design stopping point, and was then required to keep walking past it, and to keep walking it, had to pretend the stopping point was never there. So these are the rules of what follows. The 4 kinds of fracture this series will move through. Slowly, one at a time. Age that loops never settles. The origins that contradict each other about where a character or a rivalry truly began. The formula that changes its own contents every time it is revealed, holding on to nothing but love. And the timeline that broke the moment a finale was ordered to become a middle. None of this is failure. Exactly, is what happens when a sitcom-shaped cartoon runs for a quarter of a century, told by many hands across many years, each one reaching back into a past that the last one wrote differently. Contradictions are not bugs in the story. They are the fossil record of a story that was never allowed to stop. There is a document inside the series, small and easy to miss, that contains the first crack in everything. In the episode Sleepy Time, SpongeBob's boating license appears on screen, and printed on it is a birth date, the 14th of July, 1986. For a moment, the character is anchored to a real point in time, given a beginning, the way a person is given one. And then, quietly, in the versions of that same license shown later, the birth date is simply gone. Removed, the document remains, face remains, the character remains, but the one line that would let you count his years has been erased. Think about what that erasure is protecting. A number on a card is a small thing, until it becomes the thread that, pulled, unravels the whole illusion that this figure exists outside of time. The series premiered on the 1st of May, 1999. By the year 2026, it has been running continuously for 27 years. And across all of that time, SpongeBob has never once aged past young adulthood. Does not get older. Does not graduate into the next stage of a life. He arrives already formed, already employed, already living alone, and he stays exactly there, while the calendar outside the television turns over decade after decade. This is not an accident of animation, and it is not laziness. It was a decision, made early and defended fiercely, and understanding that decision, the key to understanding why the age paradox feels less like a flaw, and more like the series keeping a promise it made to itself before it ever aired. The person who made that promise was Stephen Hillenburg. When he designed the character, he designed an adult. Someone who holds a full-time job. Someone who comes home to a house that is his own. When executives at the network asked him to add a schoolteacher figure, an authority to preside over SpongeBob, and make him feel more like a child, more relatable to children watching, Hillenburg is reported to have been prepared to leave the project entirely rather than turn SpongeBob into a kid. What he offered instead was a compromise. The shape of that compromise is the shape of the paradox we are still living with. He created Mrs. Puff's boating school, a place of tests and desks and a teacher, yes, but a school an adult attends to earn the right to drive. The authority figure was kept. The childhood was refused. And so SpongeBob is placed permanently in a strange middle position. He is an adult by every marker the series gives him, and yet he is also, forever, a student, sitting for a licensing test he cannot pass. This is where the paradox stops being a matter of a missing birth date, and becomes something you can measure in numbers, because the show does put numbers on it, and the numbers do not behave the way a life behaves. In the first season episode Boating School, we learn that by the time of that particular failed attempt, SpongeBob has already failed the boating test 37 times. 37 is a number a person could believe, the number of a very unlucky, very stubborn student. It fits inside a single stretch of ordinary time. Then hold that against a later figure. By the 4th season episode Mrs. Puff, You're Fired, which aired on the 1st of April, 2006, the series states that SpongeBob's cumulative count of failed boating tests has reached 1,258,056. The number has left the realm of a life and entered the realm of geology. To fail a test that many times, at any believable human rate, would take a span of years no single lifetime could hold. And yet nothing about him has changed. His face is the same. His status is the same. He is still the student, still failing, still turning up for the next attempt, as though the counter behind him were not accumulating the weight of centuries. The gap between 37 and over 1,000,000 is not a joke the show tells once. It is the paradox itself, written in its own bookkeeping, sitting there for anyone patient enough to notice. Consider one more detail, as it sharpens all of this to a fine point. SpongeBob is the only student in the entire history of Mrs. Puff's boating school who has never, not one single time, passed the driving test. Others come, others fail, others eventually succeed and leave, moving on the way students are supposed to move on. He alone does not move. The school is a place people pass through. He is the one fixed object inside it, the permanent resident of a room designed to be temporary. Everyone else gets to have time move forward for them. He is exempt, and the exemption is a kind of sentence. The show is aware of its own strangeness here, and in 2021 it gave the paradox a mirror. Prequel spin-off Kamp Koral, SpongeBob's Underyears, shows SpongeBob and Patrick as 10-year-old campers at a summer camp, run by a young Mr. Krabs, whose daughter Pearl appears in that same show as a baby. Set that beside everything we have just walked through. Here, at last, is a SpongeBob who is explicitly a child, with an age you can name. Here is Mr. Krabs younger, and Pearl not yet grown, full cast placed earlier along a line of time. It is the one place the franchise agrees to say, plainly, that these characters have a before, and it only makes the main show's silence louder, because the moment you can picture SpongeBob at 10, you are forced to ask how many years should separate that child from the adult failing his 1,000,000,000 tests, and the honest answer is that the adult was never allowed to count them. The birth date was taken off the card, the number was left to climb past 1,000,000, and he stays exactly as he is, young, employed, alone, and endlessly enrolled, while the years he never spends pile up on the other side of the glass. The episode carries a strange name for a cartoon. Not a pun about the sea, just a bare code. SB129. To understand why that matters, you have to know what the letters and numbers actually are. The SB stands for SpongeBob, and the 129 marks it as the 29th segment produced during the first season. This is a production code, the sort of internal label a studio uses to track its own work. The kind of thing meant to live on a whiteboard and never reach an audience. And yet here it is, printed on the title card, said aloud by nobody, standing in for a name. Of every SpongeBob SquarePants episode ever made, this is the only one released under its production code as its actual title, and there is something fitting in that. A story about time misbehaving is named after the machinery of its own making. It first aired on the last day of the 20th century, December 31st, 1999, tucked into Season 1, Episode 14, paired with a segment called Karate Choppers. Think about that placement for a moment. A show barely a season old, still figuring out what it is, closing out a year and a century with its first real experiment in time. The writing came from Aaron Springer, Eric Wees, and Mr. Lawrence, and Springer also directed it, which was his first time serving as storyboard director rather than storyboard artist. So this is a step up for one person. First attempt at holding the whole shape of an episode, and the shape he chose to hold was one of the hardest a cartoon can attempt. Time travel. The first instance of it in the entire series. The setup is almost embarrassingly small, which is part of why it works. SpongeBob and Patrick want to go jellyfishing, and they want Squidward to come. He does not want to come. That is the entire engine. Squidward's escape from an unwanted invitation is what sets everything in motion. And the way he escapes? By shutting himself inside the freezer of the Krusty Krab. The door closes on a man who only wanted to be left alone. And then, the door does not open. He becomes trapped. He becomes frozen. And he stays that way for 2,000 years. Well on that number. Because the episode does not let you pause on it. And that is precisely why it deserves the attention. A man avoids an afternoon and loses 20 centuries. The punishment is so wildly out of scale with the offense that it stops being punishment, becomes something closer to physics. Squidward did not do anything monstrous. He declined a social outing. The universe of the episode answers this small refusal with a span of time longer than most of recorded human history. What makes it land is that the show never argues about it. There is no lesson attached, no moral weighed out. The freezer simply keeps him, and time simply passes, and the passing is total. When he thaws, the future that greets him is built around a joke that is also a genuine idea. He is revived by a robotic descendant of SpongeBob, a machine called Spongetron, in a bikini bottom where everything is chrome, or where everything has been spray painted to look like chrome. Hold those two options side by side, because the difference between them is the whole texture of the future. Either this world genuinely became metal and gleaming, or it merely painted itself to seem that way. A future that is truly advanced, or a future performing advancement over the same old surfaces. The episode offers both readings at once, and does not choose, and I think that ambiguity is more honest than most serious science fiction manages. Progress that might be real, and might be a coat of paint. And notice what Spongetron is. Not SpongeBob, but a descendant of SpongeBob, and a robotic one. The sponge Squidward spent the whole first act fleeing has not disappeared across 2,000 years. He has propagated. He has become a lineage. and the lineage has become mechanical. And it is this mechanical continuation of the exact person Squidward wanted to avoid that reaches down and brings him back to life. There is a cruelty in that which the episode plays lightly. You cannot escape SpongeBob by waiting. Wait long enough, he becomes the entire future. What follows is where the paradox mechanics actually turn. Squidward wants to go home. To get there, he borrows a time machine, and the reasonable expectation, the expectation the whole premise has trained you to hold, that he will travel backward the 2,000 years and land in his own kitchen. So Squidward grabs the lever himself and sets the machine for the deepest past he can find, hoping to land somewhere before SpongeBob was even born. The dial carries him all the way back to prehistoric times. He has aimed at home and arrived before home existed, and waiting for him there, in that deep past, are caveman versions of SpongeBob and Patrick. This is the shape that makes the episode a genuine paradox story rather than a simple journey. Squidward has now met both ends of these two lives. In the future, he encountered a descendant of SpongeBob, and in the past, he encounters an ancestor, primitive versions of the same sponge and the same starfish he was trying to avoid on an ordinary afternoon. He has bracketed them. He has seen where they lead and where they come from, and in neither direction can he get away. The two figures he did not want to spend a single day with turn out to exist at every point on the line of time he can reach. The far future is theirs. The far past is theirs. The one place that is properly his, small warm present he actually wanted, is the exact place the machine will not take him. That is the real engine of the paradox, and it is worth being precise about it. Squidward's problem is never that time travel is confusing. His problem is that every attempt to correct his position makes his position worse, and each correction lands him among the same two people in a new costume. The freezer took him forward too far. The machine sends him back too far. He is a man trying to return to a single ordinary moment, and the structure of time keeps refusing him that moment while granting him every other one he did not ask for. He wanted less of SpongeBob and Patrick. Time gives him more, at both extremes, stretched across 2,000 years in each direction, and it never once gives him the plain afternoon he could have simply attended in the first place. There is a moment in the 5th season, in a segment titled Friend or Foe, when it tries to answer a question it had left alone for years. Where did the Krusty Krab come from? How did a penny-pinching crab and the smallest villain in the ocean end up on opposite sides of a road, one running the most famous restaurant in Bikini Bottom, and the other running a failing shack across from it? Friend or Foe was the first episode of Season 5, and it aired in April of 2007, written by a room of hands, Casey Alexander and Zeus Service and Mike Mitchell and Stephen Banks and Tim Hill. The reason so many names sit on it is that it carries a heavy load. It is an origin story, and what makes it worth sitting with tonight is not that it tells you the origin, but that it cannot decide which origin to tell. Mr. Krabs begins. He tells SpongeBob that he and Plankton were once childhood best friends, two outcasts who found each other because nobody else would have them. There is a small, almost tender image at the center of his account. Krabs finds a penny at a carnival. Instead of keeping it, is the thing you would expect from him. He spends it to buy Plankton a balloon. Think about what that detail is doing. This is the same Krab whose entire character is built on the refusal to part with money, and the founding memory he offers, the memory of giving money away. The Plankton, of all people, for nothing in return, whether that softness is real, or whether it is the flattering shape a man gives his own past. The episode does not yet say. From there, Krabs walks his story into business. Before the two of them ever flip a patty of their own, they show up hungry at a place called Stinky's Burgers, and instead of taking their order, the owner just waves them off toward the back. Two outcasts, once more, shut out of the room. So they build their own, and then, Krabs is telling, friendship breaks over a difference in philosophy, disagreement about what a business should be, how it should treat the people it feeds. Falling out ends with Krabs himself, thrown into a dump pile. He is the wronged party. He is the one who wanted something decent and cast out for it. That is the version he wants SpongeBob and you to believe. Then, Plankton speaks. The episode does the thing that makes it more than a flashback. Plankton tells the same story, the same carnival, the same burgers, the same collapse, except every role is reversed. In Plankton's account, it is Krabs who is power-hungry, Krabs who corrupts the shared dream, and it is Plankton who ends up thrown into the dump pile, the wronged party, the one cast out. Two men, one history, two accounts that agree on the shape of events and disagree completely on who did what to whom. Neither of them is lying about the furniture of the past. They are lying, or at least bending, about the direction of the blame. The carnival happened. The burgers happened. The dump pile happened. Only the question of which of them landed in it is in dispute. And that is the only thing that matters. This is the contradiction the whole chapter turns on. so it is worth slowing down here. The paradox in a show like this does not usually announce itself. It hides inside a joke, and the joke in Friend or Foe is that both men are so committed to being the victim that they narrate identical stories with the moral polarity flipped, watching two unreliable narrators sit in the same room and cancel each other out. And because they cancel each other out, the episode has to bring in a third voice to break the tie. That voice is Karen. Plankton's computer wife interrupts the dueling stories and does something neither man expected. She calls both of them liars, flatly, and then she plays back her own recorded footage from her database, the machine memory that does not flatter and does not forget. And what the recording shows is smaller and stranger than either grand tragedy the men told. There was no philosophical war. There was a burger stand with exactly one customer, Old Man Jenkins, the first and only person to walk up to it. He faints the moment he tastes the patty. That is the real beginning, not two friends betraying a dream, two amateurs and a single fainting customer. And then Karen's footage shows the actual fight, which is not about philosophy at all. Krabs and Plankton scuffle over the paper the recipe is written on, tugging at it until it tears clean in two. Plankton is left standing there holding his half. His half reads the words, and a pinch of chum. That is all he keeps. That torn fragment is, in one gesture, the entire rest of the series explained. Plankton spends decades chasing a formula he already helped hold, and the piece he was left with, the piece nobody would ever want. Chum, the part that drives customers away, rather than toward. The half that made the restaurant famous stayed in the claw of the crab. There is one more detail in Karen's account, and it is the one I find myself thinking about most. During that fight, a shelf gets knocked over, and its contents, various ingredients, spill down into the batter. The Krabby Patty recipe, the thing that built an empire, the secret so valuable that a rival plots his whole life around it, an accident, is the byproduct of two men wrestling over paper while a shelf tips. Krabs is simply the one left holding the half that happened to catch the spill. Consider what that does to Krabs' carnival and balloon version, and to Plankton's mirror of it. Both men told stories in which they were principled agents of their own fate, builders and betrayers, and the machine's record replaces all of it with clumsiness and luck. The founding of the Krusty Krab, and the version the episode itself endorses as true, is a story with no hero and no villain, only a mess and a fainting old man. If Friend or Foe were the only account the show ever gave, you could call the matter settled. Karen has the tape. The tape wins. But the reason this chapter exists is that the series had already told you something else entirely, 5 years earlier, and it does not match. Go back to Season 3 to a short called Krusty Krab Training Video, which aired in May of 2002, written by Aaron Springer and C.H. Greenblatt and Kent Osborne. This one is built as an in-universe corporate training film, narrated by a guest voice, an unnamed narrator performed by Steve Kahela, smooth institutional voice that instructional videos always have. And the founding story this narrator tells has nothing to do with Plankton at all, nothing to do with a carnival or a shared burger stand. In this account, after something the narrator calls only the war, Mr. Krabs falls into a long depression, and his luck turns only when he comes into possession of a bankrupt retirement home. The home is called the Rusty Krab, and Krabs converts it into a restaurant by the simplest act imaginable. He paints a red letter K in front of the word Rusty. Rusty becomes Krusty. The retirement home becomes the Krusty Krab. Fit with how completely that contradicts the other origin. In Friend or Foe, the restaurant is born from a partnership and an accident with a batter. In Krusty Krab Training Video, it is born from a soldier's grief and a coat of paint over a failed old folks' home. One story has Plankton at its center as the co-founder and eternal rival. The other does not mention Plankton at all, and locates the birth of the place in a building that already existed, that already had a name one letter away from its future. These are not two angles on one event. They are two different beginnings, and the series presents each with a straight face, each inside a frame that insists on its own authority. The training video is an official document. Karen's footage is a machine record. Both are the kind of source you are supposed to trust. They tell you incompatible things. I want to be careful here, because it would be easy to treat this as a mistake, a writer's room forgetting what an earlier writer's room had done. Maybe it is exactly that, but the more interesting way to hold it is the way you would hold contradictory founding myths in anything older than a cartoon. City, family, a nation. The Krusty Krab has a version where it was born from friendship and betrayal, a version where it was born from war and a paint can, and a version, the bearing paper, that even the friendship and betrayal episode admits is the boring true one underneath. The restaurant is old enough, in its own fictional world, to have accumulated a mythology, and mythologies do not stay consistent. They grow layers. Each layer serves whoever is telling it. Krabs telling SpongeBob wants to look like a wronged idealist. Training Video wants a clean, dignified, corporate parable. Neither is quite lying. Each is only remembering in the shape it needs. And there is a third layer, quieter than the other two, that widens the whole picture. In Season 5, in a short called The Original Fry Cook, which aired in July of 2007, written by Stephen Banks and Richard Purcell and Paul Tibbett, the series reveals that SpongeBob was not the first person to stand at that grill. There was a cook before him, named Jim, voiced by the guest Patton Oswalt. The episode reaches back to the restaurant as it ran in the 1970s, and both Krabs and Squidward remember the place as having more class then. There is a whole era of the Krusty Krab that predates the fry cook the entire series is built around. The predecessor stood where SpongeBob stands, in a version of the restaurant that the people who were there recall as finer than the one you know. What makes Jim matter to this chapter is not only that he came before, but why he left. Jim tells SpongeBob that he quit, and he gives 2 reasons, both of which cut against the mythology. He wanted a bigger culinary career than a small underwater burger joint could hold, and when he asked Mr. Krabs for a raise, Krabs did not refuse him seriously, or argue him down. Krabs laughed the request off, treated it as a joke rather than a request, and Jim walked. Set that beside the carnival penny and the balloon. The crab who supposedly once spent his only coin to buy Plankton a gift is the same crab who cannot take a good cook's plea for fare, pay seriously enough to answer it, whichever origin is true. The man they all describe as consistent in this one thing, at least. The money stays with Krabs, and everyone who works near him eventually learns it. So the Krusty Krab arrives to you tonight with 3 pasts that do not fit together. A shared past with Plankton that both founders remember as their own martyrdom until a machine plays back an accident. A wartime past with a bankrupt retirement home and a red letter K. A past with a better cook and a classier dining room, ended by a laughed-off raise. You do not have to choose between them. The show never chose. It simply kept adding beginnings, each true within its own frame, and left the contradictions sitting there, unbothered. The way old places carry more history than any single story can hold. Consider what it means for a single object to have more than one true beginning. Not a mystery with a hidden answer, but a set of answers that cannot all stand at once, each delivered with the same straight face, each asking to be believed. The Krabby Patty formula is that object. Across the run of the show and its offshoots, the story of where it came from has been told and retold in ways that do not merely differ in detail, but contradict one another at the root. And the strange thing is that the series never seems troubled by this. Each version arrives certain of itself. Only when you set them side by side does the ground begin to move. Begin with the version that feels most like an origin, as it wears the shape of one. In Friend or Foe, first broadcast in 2007, a flashback opens on a friendship. Mr. Krabs and Plankton, we learn, were childhood best friends, 2 outcasts who were turned away from the popular Stinky Burgers stand, and answered that rejection by building their own. They opened a joint burger stand together at the town dump, and called it Plabs Burgers, a name stitched from both of theirs, which tells you how completely the enterprise belonged to the 2 of them at once. There is a sweetness to this that the present-day rivalry never lets you feel. Before they were enemies, they were partners, and the thing they were building was shared. The formula, in this telling, is spilled into being rather than invented. Krabs and Plankton fight over their joint recipe, the Plab Patty, and in the struggle they tear the paper in half. Plankton is left holding a torn scrap that reads, in effect, that the recipe ends with a pinch of chum, and then, by pure accident, a shelf of ingredients tips and spills into the batter. And out of that chaos the Krabby Patty is born. Think about what that does to the idea of authorship. No one designs the greatest recipe in the sea. It falls off a shelf during an argument between 2 friends who are in the middle of ceasing to be friends. The formula and the friendship break in the same motion. Now hold that account up against an earlier one. Plankton's Army, which aired in the United States in January of 2004, 3 years before Friend or Foe, frames the whole conflict as a 25-year rivalry. It begins, in that telling, with Plankton's first attempt to steal the formula, and it makes no reference whatsoever to the 2 of them having invented anything together. No dump, no Plabs Burgers, no shared paper torn down the middle. In this version there is a formula, and there is a thief, and the thief has always been the thief. The friendship that Friend or Foe would later present as the buried foundation of everything simply is not there, is not contradicted, is absent, which is a quieter kind of contradiction, and in some ways a stranger one. Between those 2 sits a third claim that belongs to neither. In Enemy in Law, aired in October of 2005, Mr. Krabs speaks of the Krabby Patty formula as a family formula. He accuses Plankton of romancing his mother, Mama Krabs, for the sole purpose of obtaining it, and the accusation only makes sense if the formula is Krabs' family property, something passed down or held within the bloodline. That is a different theory of ownership entirely. This is neither an accident on a shelf nor a shared recipe between two boys at a dump. It is inheritance. Krabs, in this moment, treats the formula as his family's to guard, which is difficult to square with a version where he and Plankton made it together, and impossible to square with a version where a shelf made it for them. And then, years later, ground shifts one more time, and this time, the series shifts it on itself. The same prequel spin-off aired an episode called Kitchen Sponge in March of 2021, and it hands the origin to someone who, in every prior account, had nothing to do with it. Here a young SpongeBob invents the Krabby Patty formula himself, while helping Plankton in the kitchen of the Krusty Canteen camp. Mr. Krabs is credited with no role in creating it at all. Friendship, torn paper, family inheritance, spilled shelf, all of it gives way to a child who was not even part of the earlier stories. And the episode goes further still. This version, SpongeBob, not Krabs and not Plankton, is also the one who unintentionally gives Plankton the idea to make chum, which lifts the credit for both the formula and the chum away from the account friend or foe had so carefully built. This is not a fan stretch. When Kitchen Sponge aired, some fans and commentators online described it in similar terms, as an in-universe retcon of the Krabby Patty origin that friend or foe had established, a second rewriting of where the formula came from. Though the contradiction is more than something a careful viewer notices, the writing itself performs it, openly, one version overwriting another. What you are left with is not a puzzle to solve, but a condition to sit inside. The formula is, at once, an accident between two friends, a prize a lone thief has always coveted, Krabs' family heirloom, and the work of a child in a camp kitchen. None of these can make room for the others. And perhaps the honest way to hold this is stop asking which is real, and notice instead that it treats its own past as soft, rewritable, a thing that can be told again whenever a new story needs it to be true. Formula was never really a recipe. It was always a place to hang whatever story the moment required, and the moments, it turns out, required very different things. The Flying Dutchman is a strange figure to build a mythology around, as the series cannot seem to agree on how he came to be, and the very first time it tries to explain him, it does so at one remove. First appearance in the series is not a scene at all. It is a comic book. Inside the episode Squidward the Unfriendly Ghost, in Season 1, a comic titled The Origin of the Flying Dutchman is shown and read on screen, and this small object carries the entire weight of his backstory. Consider how odd that framing is. The show does not stage his death for us. It hands us a comic and lets a piece of printed fiction inside a work of fiction tell us who this ghost is. And what the comic says is genuinely peculiar. According to that origin story, the Flying Dutchman's corpse was used as a mannequin, a window display for a clothing shop called Kid World. His body was put on show to sell clothes. The comic explains that he haunts the seven seas for one specific reason, that he was never properly laid to rest. That is the engine of the whole legend as first written. He was never given a grave, body treated as furniture, and a spirit left restless as the ordinary rites of death were denied to him. Whatever else you think of it, that is a clear and internally consistent premise. He was never buried, and the absence of a burial is precisely why he cannot rest. Hold on to that, as the series later steps directly on it. In the television special The Curse of Bikini Bottom, which aired in 2009, during the 7th season, the Flying Dutchman opens his closet, picks out a shirt, calls it the shirt he was buried in. That single line quietly demolishes the origin. If he was buried, and buried wearing a particular shirt he still keeps in his closet, then he was laid to rest after all. And the reason he gives in the comic for haunting the seas simply does not hold. There is no way to make the mannequin and the burial belong to the same life. One says his body became a store display and was never interred. The other says he owns the clothes he was buried in. Think about what that means for the character. The founding wound of his existence, the thing that supposedly binds him to the water, has been rewritten by a throwaway costume gag roughly a decade later. The contradictions do not stop at how he died. They extend to when he can even appear. His first physical, on-screen appearance is not in that comic, but in Scaredy Pants, an earlier Season 1 episode that aired in October of 1999 and stands as the series' first Halloween episode. And Scaredy Pants gives the Dutchman a rule. Mr. Krabs tells a campfire legend in which the Flying Dutchman descends on Bikini Bottom in his ghost ship every Halloween night, and he comes for a specific purpose, to steal souls. Legend frames him as a seasonal terror, a creature bound to a single date, arriving once a year when the veil is thin and departing again. It is a lovely piece of folklore for a Halloween episode, and as a rule of the sea, it is almost immediately untrue. As the Dutchman does not keep to Halloween, he appears in numerous episodes that are not set on that night at all. He He turns up in Shanghai, a second season story with nothing to do with the holiday. He appears in Ghoul Fools in the 8th season, an episode that happened to air in late October but is never depicted as taking place on Halloween night within the story itself. So the legend told at the campfire, the one that gives him his menace and his schedule, contradicted by his own habits across the series. He is described as a once-a-year visitor and then behaves like a figure who can arrive whenever a plot requires him. The rule exists, and the show breaks it, and it never pauses to notice the difference. What interests me most is that his powers follow the same pattern of quiet inconsistency. In Scaredy Pants, he is a soul stealer, a genuine threat, a spirit who takes what is yours. But look at how his abilities behave once he is a recurring character rather than a legend. In Shanghai, SpongeBob and Patrick steal his dining socks, and in order to get them back, the Dutchman agrees to grant 3 wishes. That detail matters more than it seems. His wish granting is not a power he simply possesses and uses. It is a negotiated trade, something he offers in exchange for the return of his property. The ghost who once descended to seize souls is here reduced to bargaining over socks, dispensing wishes as the price of a small theft. The supernatural has become transactional. His magic works, but only when the terms are right, and the terms are set by a pair of thieves who took his laundry. Here the series does something revealing about the nature of that wish granting. Shanghai was produced with 3 alternate endings. In each version, the Dutchman awards the final wish to a different character. In one it goes to Patrick, in another to Squidward, in another to SpongeBob, and each of them wishes for something different. Think about what that says regarding his power. The outcome of his magic was never fixed. It was a variable the production could set 3 separate ways, 3 genuinely different resolutions of the same supernatural deal. His power is not a stable law of this world. It is a dramatic device that can point in whatever direction the ending needs. The ghost grants a wish, and the show itself could not decide whose wish it was. There is one more measurement of this figure that I find strangely moving, and it comes from Your Shoes Untied, in the 2nd season. There the Flying Dutchman states 2 numbers about himself. He says he has been the fancy knotting contest champion for the past 3,000 years, and he says he personally has not worn shoes in over 5,000 years. Sit with those figures for a moment. 5,000 years without shoes. 3,000 years holding a title in a knot-tying competition. These are the concrete facts he offers about his own eternity. They are domestic ones. What an eternity hands him to keep track of is knots and shoes, rather than the number of souls he has taken. The scale is vast, and the content is small, and that combination tells you something honest about how the series actually treats him. He is ancient beyond human reckoning, and what he does with that span is enter contests and keep track of how long his feet have been bare. So when you gather these threads together, a portrait emerges of a character defined less by a coherent supernatural law than by the needs of each episode he wanders into. He was never buried, until he was. He comes only on Halloween, except when he does not. He steals souls, and also grants wishes as ransom for socks, and the wish itself could be given to any of 3 characters. He has stood outside time for 5,000 years, and he spends that time on knots. None of it fits, and I do not think it was ever meant to fit. The Flying Dutchman is what happens when a show reaches for a ghost whenever it wants one, and never keeps a ledger of what it has already said. His rules of the sea are not rules. They are the residue of 100 separate decisions, each made for a single story, none of them checked against the last. And there is a quiet fascination in watching a legend contradict itself so completely, and sail on regardless, unbothered, still steering his ship through whatever night the writers happen to need. There is a particular kind of horror that only reveals itself in repetition, and SpongeBob's failure to earn a boating license is the purest example the show ever built. Consider where it begins. In boating school, the 1st season episode that first aired in August of 1999, SpongeBob has already taken the oral portion of Mrs. Puff's exam 38 times before the episode even opens. He can recite the answers before the questions are asked. Notice what that fact establishes. The knowledge is not the problem. It was never the problem. He has the material memorized so completely that the test has stopped being a test and become a liturgy, a call and response he performs from muscle rather than thought. Still, the outcome does not change. What interests me here is not whether SpongeBob deserves to pass. It is the shape of the thing. A loop, by definition, does not learn. It returns to its starting position no matter what happens inside it. And the machinery that surrounds SpongeBob, the school, the teacher, the licensing authority, is built to guarantee that return. Every episode that touches the boating test is a fresh entry into the same closed circuit, and the circuit resets itself before the credits, ready to run again as if nothing occurred. Nowhere is that resetting made more literal than in Mrs. Puff You're Fired, from the 4th season, in 2006. series puts an actual number on the accumulated failure. The official records of Superintendent Gunther Fitz show that SpongeBob has failed the boating driving test exactly 1,258,056 times. Let that figure settle for a moment, because the show clearly wants you to. It is absurd, and it is also a confession, a number that large records not a struggling student, but a system that has decided, structurally, that this student will never be allowed to graduate, because his graduation would end the premise that keeps the whole arrangement running. Notice who keeps the record. The organization that oversees Mrs. Puff, that threatens to strip away her teaching certification, is the Boating Teachers Accreditation Bureau, and Gunther Fitz is its face on screen, so there is an outer ring to the loop. SpongeBob cannot pass, and beyond that a governing body exists specifically to hold Mrs. Puff accountable for the fact that he cannot, which means the failure has been institutionalized, filed, given an office and a superintendent, and a paper trail. The loop is not a private embarrassment between one sponge and one teacher. It has an administrative body. Then watch how the episode dissolves its own crisis. SpongeBob's driving demonstration ends in an explosion, and that explosion destroys the records office, erasing his failure file entirely. The blast tells you, in effect, that it is now as if he never failed, and that erasure is the plot device that saves Mrs. Puff, because with no record of his 1.25 million failures, there is nothing left for the Bureau to fire her over. Think about the mechanism there. The loop is not resolved. It is deleted. The count does not reach a conclusion. It is simply set back to zero by catastrophe, so that the machinery can begin accumulating failures again from a clean page. That is not an ending. That is a reset, dressed as an ending, and it tells you something honest about how the show survives its own contradiction. When the arithmetic of failure grows too heavy to carry, it does not pay the debt. It burns the ledger. If Mrs. Puff You're Fired resets the loop by destroying the record, No Free Rides, from the second season aired in 2001, shows the loop resetting itself even when SpongeBob is handed the thing he has wanted the whole time. On the final exam of the year, he scores 6 out of a required 600. There is no ambiguity in that number. It is not a near miss. And Mrs. Puff issues him a license anyway, not because he passed, but purely to be rid of him, to discharge him from her classroom by any means available. For a moment, the loop appears broken. He has the license. The premise seems finished, but the episode will not permit the circuit to stay open, and so it closes the loop within its own runtime. Mrs. Puff tries to secretly steal back the new boatmobile that came with his freedom. He crashes it. She is arrested and jailed, and in the fallout, SpongeBob's license is revoked. By the end, both characters have been returned precisely to where they started, student and teacher. The illegitimate license annulled, classroom refilled. The story did not merely fail to let him out. It engineered his removal from the loop, and then engineered his return, all inside a single episode, as though it had an immune response to any state in which SpongeBob can legally drive. You begin to see, after enough of these, that the license is never an object SpongeBob can hold. It appears only under conditions that guarantee it will be taken away. The pattern is almost mechanical. In SpongeBob Longpants, an instructor grants him a license purely because he is wearing long pants, despite the fact that he causes major boat damage during the test itself. The competence is irrelevant. The damage is irrelevant. A license is issued on a whim about trousers, and then, the instant SpongeBob changes back into his usual shorts, the same instructor physically rips the license up on the spot. The document exists for the length of a costume choice. It is granted and destroyed by the same hand, in the same scene, on a basis that has nothing whatever to do with driving. The loop does not even bother, this time, to disguise its own arbitrariness. The most recent turn of the wheel makes the pattern almost self-aware. An exchange student driver from the 16th season, which aired in September of 2025, Mrs. Puff enrolls SpongeBob in a foreign exchange driving program at a place called Klopnod, hoping once again be permanently rid of him. In Klopnod, he actually receives a license, though the reason is telling. He receives it because everyone there drives worse than he does. His competence is not measured against a standard. It is measured against a lower surrounding, which is its own quiet joke about how the standard has always been the variable that decides his fate. And then, SpongeBob does something the loop has never let him do from the inside. He voluntarily gives the license back, declaring himself, in effect, still not ready to drive in Bikini Bottom. That gesture is the closest the series comes to acknowledging its own machinery. When the episode aired, the reporting around it noted the full span of the joke. It had been 26 years since the 1999 premiere, and across all of that time, SpongeBob had never once held a legitimately earned Bikini Bottom boating license. 26 years. 2.5 decades of episodes, of exams, a record that swelled past 1 million and then was erased, of licenses granted for long pants and worse foreign drivers, and a teacher's desperation. Not one of them counted. The loop absorbed every attempt. I do not think the series is asking you to feel sorry for SpongeBob, and I do not think it is punishing him. Failure is not moral, it is structural. He is caught in a premise that cannot afford to release him, because his release would end the premise, and so the writing invents whatever it must. Explosion, a jailing, costume change, a foreign country. Return him to the starting line before the next episode begins. Count resets, the classroom refills, and somewhere in an office, a bureau keeps watch over a teacher whose only real failure is that the story will never let her succeed. Consider a town that cannot decide when it was born. Most places carry a single founding, date on a plaque, story parents pass to children. Bikini Bottom carries several, and the series that contains it never troubles itself to reconcile them. Across its run, the setting is handed at least 3 separate origins, each pointing to an era that flatly contradicts the others, and the calm strangeness of it is that no episode ever seems to notice. Consider what that does to a place. The timeline does not simply bend here. There are several timelines, laid over one another like transparencies, and the town lives inside all of them at once. Start with the deepest layer, the one that reaches furthest back. In 2004, it aired an episode called Ugh, also carrying the title SpongeBob BC, and it opens with a narrator who speaks the way a nature documentary speaks, telling us that life began millions of years ago in this very place. What follows are prehistoric versions of the familiar cast, cave-dwelling ancestors named SpongeGar, Patar, and Squog, and the episode is careful to place them somewhere specific, not a nameless prehistory. Bikini Bottom, BC. Same ground, the same name, occupied by grunting forebears of the characters we know. Plot turns on the oldest human story there is, the discovery of fire, and then on the loss of it, the trio finding the flame and failing to hold on to it. The show frames this as a defining early event for that caveman-era population, founding moment written in smoke. So one version of Bikini Bottom is older than recorded time, a settlement that predates language and learns to make fire the way our own distant ancestors did. Hold that thought gently, because the next layer does not fit beneath it or above it. It simply sits alongside, insisting on a different kind of age entirely. That layer is mythic rather than geological, and it belongs to King Neptune. In 2010, the episode The Clash of Triton is built around Neptune celebrating a birthday, and the number it chooses is exact, his 5,000th. A party is thrown for him at the Krusty Krab, which sets this god-king, ruler of the ocean and everything in it including Bikini Bottom, at an age of 5,000 years. Notice how that reshapes the town's history. If the sovereign who rules these waters has lived 5,000 years, then the political order of Bikini Bottom belongs to a mythic timescale, a world of ancient monarchs and immortal rulers, closer to legend than to biology. 5,000 years is a vast span by human reckoning. Against millions of years of prehistoric occupation, it is almost recent. The two figures do not add up to a single history. They gesture at 2 different kinds of past, one measured in the slow drift of species, and one measured in the reigns of gods. Neptune's claim on the place is not incidental, and an earlier episode makes the nature of that claim unusually literal. In 2000, Neptune's spatula borrows the shape of the King Arthur legend and pours the town into it. A golden spatula sits lodged in a griddle at the Fry Cook Museum, and a plaque beside it states that no one has ever been able to pull it free. Sword in the stone, transposed into a kitchen. SpongeBob frees it, and he frees it by accident, without effort or intent, which is exactly how these legends work, the unlikely hand that the prophecy was waiting for. Then, King Neptune himself arrives to claim authority over whoever managed the feat. His rulership of Bikini Bottom's waters is tied, in that moment, to a sword in the stone rite of succession, a test of destiny that certifies who may command the ocean. This is a town whose royal legitimacy runs through myth, through the ancient machinery of the Chosen One. And then, without warning or apology, the series hands the same place a founding that is neither prehistoric nor mythic, but entirely modern, the kind of origin a mid-century American suburb might have. In 2010, in the 134th episode overall, SpongeBob's Last Stand, aired as part of a Nickelodeon Earth Day special, plot centers on a highway. Plankton is secretly funding the construction of the Shelley Superhighway, a road to be driven straight through jellyfish fields. Fit with what a highway implies about a place. Highways belong to a particular era of civilization, the era of paved roads and zoning votes and infrastructure projects, the era of the automobile suburb. A town that is arguing over whether to run a superhighway through its green space is a town living in something close to our own 20th century. Not in a prehistoric cave, not in a kingdom of 5,000-year-old gods. The episode deepens that modern texture through its politics. Citizens of Bikini Bottom hold a town-wide vote on the highway, and the vote comes back unanimous in favor of building it. Civic ballot, public referendum, the ordinary apparatus of a democratic community deciding its own development. Only later, after SpongeBob and Patrick mount a protest, does public opinion turn, and in the end, the highway is torn up. What matters here is not the environmental moral, but the machinery on display. Votes, protests, shifting public opinion, a road proposed, and then removed. This is a modern civil society, and it is the same Bikini Bottom that elsewhere answers to an immortal king, and elsewhere still was founded by fire, making cavemen millions of years ago. The contradiction reaches down even into a single body. In 2000, the episode Sleepy Time includes a dream sequence, and inside that dream there is a close-up of SpongeBob's driver's license. The birth date printed on it is July the 14th, 1986. Do the arithmetic that the show invites and never performs. An episode airing in January of 2000, showing a license that dates its holder to 1986, describes a character who would be about 13 years old. 13, and yet already holding that driver's license, and already working a full-time job at the Krusty Krab. Fans poring over that scene have flagged exactly this, an internal age and timeline inconsistency sitting in plain view on a piece of official identification. Individual will not resolve any more cleanly than the town will. Paper says one thing, the life on screen says another, and the two are left to sit beside each other unreconciled. There is a way of reading all this as simple carelessness, a writer's room reaching for whatever premise a given week required, and never keeping a ledger. That reading is probably true, and it is not the interesting one. The interesting thing is what the carelessness produces, which is a setting whose own history has no single spine. Bikini Bottom is millions of years old, and 5,000 years old, in a modern highway suburb, and its central citizen is 13 with a license and a career, and none of these facts are ever forced to face each other. The place exists in a kind of eternal present where every possible past is equally available and none of them is binding. For a story built to be watched drowsily, half attending, that quality is almost restful. You are never asked to hold a firm chronology in your head, as the town does not hold one either. It floats free of its own beginning. Whichever founding you reach for, the prehistoric fire, the ancient crown, the paved road put to a vote, the place will meet you there, and behave as though that were the only story it ever had. There is a version of SpongeBob's employment that the series tells you plainly in the very first minutes it ever aired, and it is worth sitting with that beginning before any of the numbers start to argue with each other. In this premiere, SpongeBob sees the Krusty Krab's help wanted sign in the window. He decides, on the spot, to apply for the fry cook job. That is the origin. Everything the franchise later says about how long he has worked, how many times he has been honored, how deep his tenure runs, all of it flows from this one small moment of a sponge reading a sign and choosing a life. The hire does not happen cleanly. Mr. Krabs refuses him at first, on the grounds that SpongeBob does not even have his sea legs, rather than simply turning him away. Krabs invents a task. He sends SpongeBob to retrieve, in his exact words, a hydrodynamic spatula with port and starboard attachments and a turbo drive, and he tells him not to come back until he has one. It is a test built to be failed. You can hear the intent in what happens the moment SpongeBob is gone, because Krabs and Squidward laugh together and predict, in effect, that they will never see that lubber again. The job was never offered. The job was withheld, dressed up as an errand. Consider what that means for the arithmetic of his career, because it matters for everything that comes after. SpongeBob's clock does not start when Krabs decides he is worthy. It starts when SpongeBob refuses to accept the refusal. He returns with a spatula, an ordinary one bought from a bargain mart vending machine, and he arrives at the exact moment the Krusty Krab is overrun by a swarm of anchovy customers, a crowd so dense it traps Krabs and Squidward inside it. The employment is not granted from above. He seizes it in an emergency, in the one instant when the restaurant needs him more than it can afford its own contempt for him. His first day and his rescue of the place are the same day. His hiring and his heroism cannot be separated in the timeline, because they are simultaneous. This is the fixed point. Everything else about his tenure will float, but this does not. The episode that shows the start of his employment, Help Wanted, was the first SpongeBob SquarePants episode ever made, and it originally aired on the 1st of May, 1999, on Nickelodeon. So the real-world anchor and the in-story anchor line up almost too neatly. The show begins, and the fry cook begins, in the same breath. If you wanted a single day from which to count his years behind the grill, that is the honest one, and it is the only one the premiere gives you. Then, less than a year later in production time, the show quietly breaks its own count. An Employee of the Month, Season 1 episode that aired on the 8th of March, 2000. SpongeBob tells Squidward that he has won Employee of the Month 26 times, says it as a boast, as a settled fact of his record, 26 honors earned. But the camera is not on his side. Behind him, in the same scene, on the same wall, hangs the evidence, and the evidence does not agree with him. The wall of winner photos displays 43 of them, not 26. 43 faces, 43 months claimed, mounted where anyone can count. Take a moment with that gap, as it is the cleanest little contradiction the early series ever left lying in plain sight. The character states a number about his own life, 26, and the set behind him states a different number, 43, and both are presented as true, in the same shot, in the same second, with no wink to tell you which to believe. There is no reconciling them. If he has won it 43 times, then he is underselling himself by 17. If he has won it 26 times, then the wall is holding 17 photographs of victories that, by his own accounting, never happened. The show wants you to feel the pride, and never expects you to bring a calculator. And that is usually a safe bet. But the number is right there on the wall. It can be counted. The wall has one more strange detail, and it deepens the puzzle rather than settling it. Past the 43 photographs, there is a 44th frame, and it holds only a blank plaque with no photo in it, an empty slot. You can read it two ways, and neither closes the case. Perhaps it is the month that has not been decided yet. Next honor waiting for its face, which would mean the wall is looking forward into a future the dialogue has not caught up to. Or perhaps it is simply an incomplete prop, a frame the animators hung and never filled, which would mean the wall is an accident and the 26 is the intended truth. The episode does not tell you. It gives you a stated number, a contradicting number, and a blank space where a number should be, all three sharing one small stretch of wall. What makes this worth a chapter is not that a cartoon miscounted, it is that the miscount attaches to time itself. Employee of the Month is a monthly award. 26 wins and 43 wins are not two ways of describing the same span. They are two different lengths of a career, two different answers to the simple question of how long this sponge has been standing at that grill. Premiere gave us one clean day to count from, the 1st of May, and then, within the same first season, the series offered two incompatible totals of the months that had passed since. The fry cook's tenure, established with such certainty in the window of the Krusty Krab, becomes uncertain the moment the series tries to measure it, and it becomes uncertain not through some grand later retcon, but here, early, on a single wall, in a single glance. There is a version of the story where SpongeBob SquarePants ends in 2004. The film released that year closes on a promotion. SpongeBob and Squidward are lifted, permanently, into new roles. Manager and assistant manager of a second restaurant, Krusty Krab 2, freshly built and gleaming beside the original, has the shape of an ending. A small character is rewarded for a long labor. A rival is given a title he never asked for, and the doors of a new establishment swing open on a settled future. And then the television series simply does not remember any of it. The promotion never returns. The second restaurant is not staffed in later episodes, not run, is barely acknowledged to exist. SpongeBob goes back to the fry station the next time we see him, ordinary employee again, as though the film had happened to some other sponge. For years, fans read the movie's final minutes as the intended finish of the whole show, a graceful curtain that the network then refused to honor. The series showrunner Vincent Waller addressed this directly, writing on Twitter that the series, in effect, had never really been chronological. That single phrase is the key to the whole chapter. He was not defending a mistake. He was describing a design. The show does not run on a timeline, then a promotion in a film is not a step forward that later episodes must build upon. It is a mood the story tried on for an afternoon, and then set aside. The movie never lied to the series. It only visited a room and chose not to live in it. Hold that idea gently, as the films keep testing it. The 2020 film, Sponge on the Run, reaches much further back than a promotion. It reaches into the beginning, showing that Mr. Krabs was inspired to open a restaurant by a young SpongeBob at a summer camp called Kamp Koral, the two of them already acquainted in childhood. The entire Krusty Krab growing from that early spark. Now set that beside the very first episode the series ever aired, Help Wanted. In that pilot, Mr. Krabs meets an adult SpongeBob as a stranger, hopeful applicant walking in off the street to ask for a job as a fry cook. The restaurant already exists. The men do not know each other. One story says the boy inspired the building. The other says the building was already there and the sponge was a face at the counter Krabs had never seen. Both cannot sit on the same line of time, and that is precisely the point Waller was making. They were never meant to. The film does the same thing to Sandy Cheeks. Sponge on the Run places her at Kamp Koral too, a childhood friend who has known SpongeBob since they were small. And it goes further. suggesting that he is the one who inspired her to become a scientist. Then look again at Tea at the Tree Dome, the early episode that introduces her. There she arrives as a new adult citizen of Bikini Bottom, a squirrel in a diving suit whom SpongeBob has genuinely never met. First meeting handled with all the nervous care of two strangers becoming friends. The wonder of that original scene is that neither of them knows the other. The film quietly deletes that wonder by making them lifelong companions. You can prefer either version. You cannot hold both. And the series, by its own admission, never asked you to. If the childhood friendship problem feels like a fresh wound the film's opened, truth is more forgiving and more strange. The series had already been contradicting itself for years, long before any movie complicated the origins. And the clearest case, the snail. Consider Gary. In one episode, Have You Seen This Snail? SpongeBob raises Gary from a baby. The two bonded across the whole span of the snail's small life. In another, Treats. Gary is already fully grown when he is adopted, brought home from the pound as an adult animal. In a third, Plankton's Pet, SpongeBob buys Gary at an animal shelter. 3 episodes, 3 separate accounts of where this one creature came from. None of them reconciled, all of them allowed to stand. The series was never a single continuous history. It was a collection of stories that happened to share a cast. Then, the prequel material tied to Sponge on the Run, the Kamp Koral world, adds a fourth. In the episode Camper Gary, SpongeBob and Patrick and Sandy first meet Gary as counselors training at the camp, after the snail eats Mrs. Puff's tomatoes and runs away. So now, the poor snail has 4 beginnings: raised from a baby, adopted grown from a pound, bought at a shelter, and met at a summer camp over a stolen crop of tomatoes. Measure that against the whole argument over film canon. The movies did not break a clean record. They joined a tradition the series had been practicing all along, telling the origin it needed for the story in front of it, and trusting the audience not to keep a ledger. Some of the conflicts, though, were not a matter of storytelling philosophy at all. They were a matter of law. Clearest case, King Neptune. In the 2004 movie, he is a specific figure, given a different color scheme, shorter beard, and a domed crown built to cover a bald spot, and voiced by Jeffrey Tambor. The television series has an entirely different king. That Neptune, voiced by John O'Hurley, wears a distinct blue-green look, and carries long brown hair and a long brown beard. 2 rulers of the same sea, sharing a name and almost nothing else. The reason they never merged is not creative indecision. Between the 2 studios, Nickelodeon and Paramount Pictures, something like an unofficial firewall seems to have stood for years afterward, keeping any element created for the film from crossing over into the show. The movie's Neptune was, quite literally, not the show's to use. That firewall is one of the quiet, invisible forces shaping what you are allowed to see, and once you know it is there, you can watch it lift. After the wall came down, the film's design was permitted to seep back in, but only as an object, only at the edge of the frame. The movie-style crown, red and gold, was allowed to appear as a background cameo item in 2 later episodes, Lost and Found and Insecurity Guards, not on a head, not ruling anything, just present, sitting in a shot, a small artifact of a version of the character the series was once forbidden to acknowledge. There is something almost touching in that. The design spends more than a decade locked outside the series, and when the door finally opens, it is let in as a prop. The same law fell on Princess Mindy. King Neptune's daughter, introduced in the 2004 film, was kept out of the television series by that same Nickelodeon and Paramount firewall. For years, she simply could not appear. When she finally did, the briefest possible gesture, a non-speaking cameo in the 2019 episode SpongeBob's Big Birthday Blowout. And by some accounts, even that small appearance was cast with a recognizable voice for a character given nothing to say. A daughter of the sea, central to the film's emotional machinery, reduced in the series to a face in a crowd, silent, waving from behind a legal line most viewers never knew existed. So the series versus film conflict, when you look at it closely, is really 2 different stories wearing one costume. One story is about time, and about a series that told you plainly it was never chronological, so that a promotion or a childhood friendship in a film is not a broken promise, but a story told in a different key. The other story is about ownership, about a wall between 2 companies that decided for 11 years which king could sit on the throne and which princess could speak. Films did not so much contradict the series as reveal how loosely the show was ever stitched together, and how much of what we call canon was decided in rooms with no animation in them at all. For most of this video, we have stayed inside the water, treating Bikini Bottom as a place with its own logic, its own memory, its own quiet contradictions. This chapter steps outside of it, because the reason those contradictions exist, the reason a jellyfish field can be there in one story and forgotten in the next, is not a hidden fictional truth waiting to be uncovered. It is a production history, a room full of writers, changing over more than 2 decades, making a specific and deliberate choice about how the series should hold together, or rather, how loosely it should be allowed to hold together at all. Start with the man who built it. Stephen Hillenburg created SpongeBob SquarePants, and he ran it from its premiere in 1999. He was the showrunner, the person whose sensibility the whole thing answered to, till he stepped away around 2004, during the production of the first SpongeBob movie. Think about what that timing means. The film was meant, in some sense, to be an ending, a place to set the character down. When Hillenburg stepped back, he handed the role to Paul Tibbitt, and it did not stop, kept going, under new day-to-day leadership, while its creator moved to the edge of it rather than the center. Paul Tibbitt held that position for a long time, from 2004 until October of 2015. That is more than a decade, a stretch longer than many entire series managed to exist at all. And then, at the tail end of Season 9, the role changed hands again. In October of 2015, Vincent Waller and Mark Ceccarelli became the series' showrunners together. 2 people now, sharing the work that one person had carried before. What is worth sitting with here is that neither of them arrived as an outsider. Vincent Waller had been on SpongeBob SquarePants since its first season, working as a storyboard artist and a writer. He had been present, in other words, for the very beginning, for the establishing of what the series looked and felt like. Mark Ceccarelli came later, joining in 2011 as a writer and a storyboard director. So the handover was not a foreign takeover. It was an elevation from within. People who had already spent years learning the grammar of the place before they were asked to guard it. There is a sadness folded into this timeline that the series could not avoid. In March of 2017, Stephen Hillenburg publicly disclosed that he had been diagnosed with ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. He died on the 26th of November, 2018, from complications of that disease. The creator of one of the most widely seen cartoons in the world was gone, and the show he had made was still in production, still going, and it did keep going. Season 13, which aired from October of 2020 through November of 2023, holds a particular and quiet distinction. It was the first season produced entirely without any involvement from Stephen Hillenburg, made wholly after his death. He remained credited, posthumously, as an executive producer. His name stayed on the work, even as the work was, for the first time, made completely without him in it. There is something honest about that arrangement. The show does not pretend he is still steering. It simply keeps his name attached to the thing he began, a standing acknowledgement carried forward by the people who learned from him. Now, change in leadership is not only a change in names, it can be a change in how the thing is actually built. When Waller and Ceccarelli took over at the end of Season 9, the production process itself shifted. Before, the series worked from 2-page outlines. A writer would sketch the shape of an episode in those 2 pages, and storyboard artists would then expand that skeleton into full boards, doing an enormous amount of the real creative work at the drawing stage. Under the new showrunners, the process moved toward writing full scripts first. The story would be more fully set down in words before it reached the boards. That sounds like a small procedural detail, and in most productions it would be. But consider what kind of scripts these are. SpongeBob's script runs, at most, about 14 pages for an 11-minute segment. A typical animated television script for a comparable length runs closer to 22 pages. So the SpongeBob script is markedly shorter than you would expect, and the reason is telling. Scripts are gag-dense, packed with jokes, and they use large blocks of descriptive text, rather than the standard, spaced-out formatting of a conventional script. The page count is low, not because there is less happening, but because the writing is compressed, more prose than screenplay in its shape. Dense paragraph of visual comedy, where another show would have airy columns of dialogue. You can feel, in that detail, what kind of object SpongeBob actually is at the level of craft. It is a joke delivery machine first. The script format bends around the joke, not the other way around. The unusual density on the page is a physical trace of a show that measures itself in gags per minute rather than in plot mechanics. Which brings us, finally, to the thing this whole video has been circling. Vincent Waller, one of the 2 people now most responsible for the series, has described its structure plainly. He has described the structure, in words fans have repeated ever since, as something close to standalone. That is his word for it. Standalone, the non-serialized, continuity-free format is no accident. It is a stated creative choice, described by a showrunner as the intended design. Sit with that, because it reframes almost everything. When we notice that SpongeBob cannot drive in one episode and drives in another, when we notice that a character dies as a gag and returns unharmed the following week, when we notice that Bikini Bottom's geography rearranges itself to suit each story, we are not catching the show in a mistake. We are watching the format do exactly what it was designed to do. An episode is meant to stand on its own, be entered from anywhere and left from anywhere, to owe nothing to what came before it, and to promise nothing to what comes after. Continuity is not being violated. Continuity was never the contract. This is, I think, the honest ground under this entire video, and it is worth naming clearly. Every paradox we have examined, every contradiction we have turned over slowly in the dark, exists because a specific structural decision made it possible, and a long line of people upheld that decision across a change of showrunners, a change of process, and the death of the creator himself. The show survived the departure of Hillenburg in 2004, survived the long Tibbet years, survived the handover to Waller and Ceccarelli at the end of Season 9, survived Hillenburg's death, produced an entire season, Season 13, without him. Through all of that turnover, one thing held steady: the commitment to the standalone episode, the refusal to lock the stories into a single continuous timeline, remained the load-bearing choice. So the answer to why SpongeBob does not add up is not mystical, and it is not a flaw. It is a room of writers, working from unusually dense scripts, starting a format that a showrunner has openly called standalone. The contradictions are the natural exhaust of a machine built to make each half-hour funny on its own terms, and to owe the past nothing. That is not a lesser answer than a grand fictional theory. In a way, it is a more satisfying one, because it is true, and because it explains, without needing to invent anything, every strange and lovely inconsistency we have spent this long night thinking about. So we arrive at the end, and the honest thing to do now is not to gather every strangeness we have looked at and pretend it resolves into a single answer. It does not. Some of what the show contradicts, it contradicts on purpose. Some of it contradicts because nobody was counting, and a few of the contradictions cannot be smoothed over at all. Not because the writers were careless, but because two things the series wants to be true simply cannot both be true. So let us sort them, gently, one last time, into the ones that fall apart when you press on them, and the ones that hold together only because it waves a hand and asks you to look elsewhere. Begin with the kindest category, the contradictions the series already knows about. Think about the campfire in Life of Crime. Patrick starts to ask how there can be a fire when everyone is underwater, and before he can finish the question, the fire goes out on its own. That is not an oversight that slipped past a script editor. That is the show reaching into its own logic, acknowledging the impossibility out loud, and then refusing to explain it, which is a very different act than failing to notice. When a story points at its own seam and grins, the seam stops being a flaw. It becomes part of the fabric. So the underwater fire, and every underwater fire after it, belongs firmly in the hand-wavable pile, because it has already done the hand-waving for us and told us it was a joke. Move next to the timeline, and here the ground gets softer. SpongeBob's driver's license, shown on screen, gives his birth year as 1986, which would make him roughly 13 years old when the 1999 pilot shows him already flipping patties at the Krusty Krab. You could spend a long night trying to reconcile that, and you would fail. But you do not have to, because the man responsible has told you not to bother. Showrunner Vincent Waller has said plainly that the timeline has never really been chronological. That is a permission slip. The writers do not treat the series' internal history as a fixed record, and so the license, the pilot, and everything around them are not evidence to be cross-examined. They are gags placed where gags were needed. The paradox is real, but it was never meant to close, and knowing that lets it rest. Prequel makes the same wound wider without meaning to. Kamp Koral prequel places a young SpongeBob at an age that by most fan accounting sits oddly far from Pearl Krabs' own age. Set that against the episodes that imply he and Mr. Krabs' daughter are closer in age, or the ones that suggest Krabs adopted Pearl decades before SpongeBob ever walked into his restaurant, and the numbers refuse to line up in any direction. This one I am inclined to call irreconcilable, and I say that as opinion, not as fact. The difference between the license and the camp is that the license contradicts a single moment, while the camp is a whole separate series built on a foundation that the main series keeps knocking out from under it. You cannot handwave an entire prequel. You can only decide which version you would rather keep, and let the other one drift off. And then there is the question the series cannot seem to answer even about the age of its own hero. SpongeBob's grandmother, on screen, in more than one episode, calls him an adult and a grown-up. Other episodes hand him a boating school desk and treat him as a naive schoolboy who has never passed his driving test. Both of these are canon. Both are spoken plainly. There is no fire that conveniently goes out here, no showrunner stepping forward to say it was always a joke. This is the show holding two incompatible facts about its central character and presenting each with a straight face. I would put this among the irreconcilable ones, and it may be the most interesting of them, because it is not a matter of dates on a card. It is a matter of what kind of creature SpongeBob is, and the show genuinely does not commit. Now let us be fair. and return to the pile that forgives easily, because a great deal of what looks paradoxical is really just the show quietly resetting itself between stories. The Krusty Krab has been destroyed on screen more than once, burned in one episode, collapsed or dismantled in others, in Nature Pants, in Squilliam Returns, in Squid on Strike. By the next episode, it stands rebuilt and open for business as though nothing had happened, with no explanation offered. You could call that a paradox. I would rather call it the oldest convention in episodic television, the promise that the world will be whole again when you return to it. The restaurant does not persist through damage. It resets. Each episode is its own small evening, and the building you fell asleep to is the building you wake to. That belongs in the hand-wavable pile without argument. Two more sit in that same forgiving corner, and they are worth naming because they were choices, not accidents. Pearl the whale stands only about twice SpongeBob's height, and Stephen Hillenburg scaled her that way on purpose, because a real sperm whale reaches something near 52 feet as an adult, and simply would not fit in the frame beside a sponge. That is not a contradiction the series is hiding. It is a compromise made openly for the sake of composition, the kind of small lie every drawing tells, so that the picture can exist at all. Plankton. In the episode Plankton, enters SpongeBob's head through a pore and fixes a mechanical mind control device to his brain, an act of engineering that no single-celled organism could ever perform. The show insists he is one cell. The show also lets that one cell build machines. You do not reconcile that. You accept that Plankton's biology was always a costume, worn for a joke about a small creature with enormous ambition, and you let the science go. There is one last thing to sort. It does not belong in either pile, because it is not a paradox at all. It is the place where the real world reached into the series. The show chose to honor it. After Ernest Borgnine died in 2012, Mermaid Man was reduced to cameos with no lines. When Tim Conway's health declined, Waller confirmed, on the 27th of September, 2018, that Conway would not return as Barnacle Boy. Conway died the following May. The characters were retired rather than recast, out of respect for the men who first gave them voice. Set beside all the contradictions we have been sorting, this is the one seam it refused to smooth over, and it refused on purpose. It would have been the easiest thing in the world to hire two new voices and let the old heroes go on. Instead, the show let them fall silent, because some inconsistencies are worth keeping, when the alternative is pretending a person was replaceable. So that is the final verdict, or whatever a verdict is worth on a show that never asked to be judged this way. The underwater fire, the ruined and rebuilt restaurant, scaled-down whale, the engineer who is only one cell, all of these hand away easily, most of them because the series handed them away first. The birth year, and the camp, and the question of whether SpongeBob is a boy or a grown man, these do not close, and I think they were never built to. The show is not a record. It is a series of evenings, each one drawn to be looked at once, in the dark, or sleep. And the contradictions are not the cost of that. They are the shape of it. So this is where the whole account arrives. Every contradiction the series holds, a sponge who cannot fail and cannot learn, the town beneath the water that breathes air, the boat that drives on roads laid across the seafloor, the restaurant that never closes, a fry cook who never leaves it. None of these are mistakes the writers forgot to fix. They are the terms of the agreement. A world that runs on paradox does not ask you to resolve it. It asks you to live inside it, the way a child accepts that the same afternoon can happen 1,000 times and each time feel new. Weigh what that means for a story that has stayed on the air for as long as this one has. The impossibilities are not cracks in the surface. They are the load-bearing walls. Take them away, and the whole thing falls quiet. And so it keeps turning, night after night, the pineapple glowing on the ocean floor, the fire still burning underwater in a kitchen that does not obey the sea. The lights of the small town stay on. Somewhere in that steady blue, a laugh you have heard 100 times begins again, unbothered by the fact that it should not be possible at all. You do not have to understand it to rest inside it. You only have to let it continue, the way it always has, the way it always will. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next.